what I'd like to do is turn the program over to our colonel, and he'll tell us all about the details of both certainly the substantive aspects of the law of war, but also the procedural.
It's often a hard sell to convince people, civilians especially, that there is such a thing as a law of war. They think that's an oxymoron. They think it's just a wanton killing and destruction, but it really isn't. You'll see from the presentation that there are many, many, many rules that govern armed conflict. People also ask me, what does a lawyer, a JAG, have to do with waging war? Well, apart from the obvious things like military justice, court-martials, things of that sort, JAGs are involved in just about everything on the battlefield. For example, when we go into a host nation like Kuwait, we often have to buy things like gasoline, food, water, things of that sort. So we contract with the host government and host government companies. So obviously contracting is one of our jobs. Another one of our jobs, as you'll see from the slides, is actually advising commanders on how to conduct a battle, because there are many, many rules that go into conducting a battle, and as you'll see, no commander goes to war without a JAG. None. It's universal through all the services. And since 9/11, actually since the first Gulf War, the services, especially the Army and the Air Force, have developed programs to get their JAGs as close to the front as possible, in some cases right on the front line, to advise commanders. Even some acquaintances of mine in the Air Force Reserve have actually ridden shotgun on patrols through Iraq, manning a .50 caliber machine gun. Because a lawyer, as distinguished from a chaplain or a medical person, is a lawful combatant. In the Air Force, we are considered line officers, so we are right out there at the front of the fight. And there are many, many, many documented stories of Air Force reservists, Army reservists, active duty, etc., JAG officers who've won Bronze Stars, Purple Hearts, and actually participated, quite extensively in combat. So that being said, let me get on to the slides. First of all, I have to give you this disclaimer. This is my view only, not the view of my former bosses at the Department of Defense or the Department of the Air Force. So if there are any misstatements or errors or controversial statements, blame me. Here's what the law of war, armed conflict is. It used to be called the law of war. Now we call it the law of armed conflict, or LOAC. The first thing you see is to prevent unnecessary suffering is one of the reasons for the law of war. Well, what is unnecessary suffering? Obviously, when you kill someone, they're going to suffer. But the way the law and the treaties are set out is that we don't use weapons that are designed simply to inflict pain or torture or suffering upon the enemy. Every weapon that the United States fields has to go through a legal review first as to whether it's a legal weapon under the laws of war. Especially, another prime reason is to protect civilians. As you know, in World War II, in Europe, no one will ever know the exact figure, but approximately 50 million people died, and over half of them were civilians. So after the war, they felt a need in the international community to enact law, sign treaties to protect these people. As I say, LOAC arises from general principles of international law. For example, when the 20 defendants, the top Nazis, were prosecuted at Nuremberg, there really wasn't any body of law that permitted us to prosecute them. What happened was they were indicted under general principles of international law, and the most serious charge against them was waging aggressive war. You won't find that in any statute, but it was a custom or a practice among civilized nations not to simply engage in wanton hostilities. And obviously, the Nazis did. This little book, Army Field Manual 2710, is the primary reference every JAG carries with him or her to battle. Of course, nowadays, believe it or not, Everyone's connected back to the U.S. by computer, so if they need to look at this, they can just get on the internet and pop it up. You can buy this almost anywhere. You can buy it off Amazon. The last time I saw it for sale in public was at the World War II Museum in New Orleans. And I think it's also on sale at the Battleship New Jersey's Visitor Center. So it's not classified. It's not confidential. And what it basically does is go through all the treaties that we're signatory to that govern the law of war, and gives JAGs, something they can hang their hat on when they advise commanders. The things that we're going to talk about concerning the law of war basically spring from things that happened after World War II. As I said earlier, one of the things the international community believed was necessary was to protect civilians. So one of these 4 Geneva Conventions governed civilians. Another one governed POWs. Another one governed combatants and non-combatants. And as opposed to the Geneva Conventions that protect people, the Hague Conventions regulate the actual conduct of hostilities. And of course, the U.S. is a signatory to these treaties. During World War II, the Germans were signatories to the predecessor treaties, and the Japanese were not. And it's a good point to make, the distinction between those 2 theaters of operations. In the European side, the Americans, Brits, the Canadians, and the Germans more or less observed the rules of the law of war and acted with chivalry, etc., where the Japanese did not. The Japanese, according to many people that came back from the Pacific War, just plain didn't fight fair. They used all sorts of treachery, things of that sort. And another important point, it really has nothing to do with the law of war, but it's important to understand the 2 theaters. The European theater was really more like a traditional war for a lot of reasons. We looked like them. We worshiped the same God, basically. We had the same cultural values, because let's face it, most of the cultural values from Europe came over to the U.S. with the immigrants. Whereas in the Pacific theater, it was really a race war. The Japanese didn't look like us. They didn't behave like us. And we regarded them as subhuman, just like Hitler regarded the Russians as subhuman. So that's one of the reasons the war in the Pacific was so vicious. Another aspect about the Pacific War that made it vicious was there was really no front line and rear area. Every place was a front line, because when you're conducting combat on a small island, there's nowhere to go. You have no rear area.